I was supposed to be there. At least, that was what I had believed. I had paid for the catering. I had booked the venue. I had ordered the flowers and personally designed every arrangement. The flowers were white hydrangeas because they were my mother's favorite. I had done everything. Everything except receive an invitation. That evening, I sat alone in my small studio apartment, still wearing the black work clothes I had spent the entire day in. My shoes were beside the door, covered in dust from the venue. My hands smelled like eucalyptus, roses, and flower food. There were tiny cuts across my fingers from the stems I had trimmed that morning. On my laptop, my Aunt Karen was streaming the family dinner live on Facebook. I almost closed it. Then I heard my mother's voice. The audio was surprisingly clear. I could hear silverware touching plates, glasses clinking together, and people talking over one another. Then my mother raised her champagne glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she said, smiling at the camera. Her cheeks were pink from the wine. I watched her smile. Then she said something that made my entire body go cold. "And honestly, I have to thank God Ashley isn't here to ruin the aesthetic with her moodiness." People around the table laughed. Not loudly. Not openly. It was the kind of uncomfortable laughter people make when they know something is cruel but don't want to be the next target. I stared at the screen. For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. Then my sister Jessica leaned back in her chair, flipped her hair over her shoulder, and laughed. "Seriously," she said. "Ashley is useful when we need someone to write checks, but she is such a social embarrassment." Another round of laughter. Jessica took a sip of champagne. "She's basically a total freeloader on our brand." I looked down at my hands. My hands were raw. Those hands had built almost everything they were celebrating. People sometimes hear the words high-end floral designer and imagine something beautiful and glamorous. They picture me standing in a bright studio, arranging roses while soft music plays in the background. That isn't my life. My life is waking up before sunrise. It's carrying 50-pound buckets of water at 4 in the morning. It's lifting heavy boxes until your shoulders ache. It's getting thorns stuck beneath your fingernails. It's cutting stems until your fingers go numb. It's scrubbing flower sap from your skin and realizing the smell still won't leave. But most importantly, those hands built the world my sister now took credit for. For 5 years, I had been the silent partner behind the Miller family's image. Jessica was the face. I was the machinery underneath it. She posted photographs. I created the settings for them. She stood in front of flower walls. I designed and built those flower walls. She signed sponsorship deals. I made sure the locations looked expensive enough for the sponsors to care. She smiled for cameras. I paid the bills that kept the lights on. My parents lived in a huge family estate that had belonged to our family for generations. From the outside, it looked like they were wealthy. The house was beautiful. The lawn was enormous. The driveway was lined with old trees. The family name carried weight in certain circles. But there was a problem nobody wanted to discuss. They couldn't afford the house anymore. Not since 2023. That was when I started sending money. Every month, on the first day, I transferred $3,500 into my parents' joint account. I told myself it was for the estate. I told myself I was protecting our family's history. I told myself that keeping the house was important. But if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't protecting a house. I was buying my place in a family that had never really made room for me. Jessica would take pictures in front of the floral installations I created. She would tag her clothing sponsors. She would tag makeup companies. She would tag photographers. She would tag the venue. She would tag everyone except me. And I never complained. At least, not out loud. She got the attention. She got the followers. She got the brand deals. She got invited to parties. She got praised for having such an eye for beauty. I got invoices. I paid the electricity bill so Jessica could film makeup tutorials in perfect lighting. I paid the water bill so the enormous lawn could stay green during her outdoor photo shoots. I paid maintenance costs so the house wouldn't look old in her pictures. I was basically the investor funding a company that refused to put my name on the ownership papers. And now, while drinking champagne I had paid for, they were calling me a freeloader. That was the moment something inside me changed. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was clarity. I looked around my studio. This place was small, but it was mine. The shelves were filled with flowers waiting to be used for the next morning's orders. Buckets stood against the walls. My design sketches were scattered across my desk. I had built this business from nothing. I had worked when everyone else was sleeping. I had taken small jobs nobody wanted. I had saved every dollar. I had learned how to negotiate with suppliers, manage clients, design installations, and run a company. While my family played the part of wealthy Southern royalty, I had built something real. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought I was obedient because I helped them. They thought my generosity meant I would never say no. They were wrong. Working with flowers had taught me something important. You have to know when something is dying. You have to notice the first signs of rot. You have to understand that sometimes saving a plant means cutting away the damaged part. And sometimes, if you refuse to cut it, the rot spreads through everything. I looked back at my laptop. My mother was laughing. Jessica was talking about her latest sponsorship. My father was sitting quietly at the end of the table. Nobody looked uncomfortable anymore. They were enjoying themselves. The family dinner continued without me. But I realized something. I had been sitting outside that family for years. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. The rot had started long before that dinner. It started with $60,000. That was the amount my grandmother had left me in her will for college. $60,000. It was supposed to pay for my tuition. It was supposed to give me a chance to graduate without drowning in debt. I never saw a penny of it. My parents didn't sneak into my account at night. They didn't hide the money. They took it right in front of me and convinced me it was necessary. When I was 18, they told me Jessica had been noticed by a modeling agency in Miami. They said she had potential. They said she needed professional coaching. She needed new clothes. She needed a portfolio. She needed travel money. They said it was an investment in her future. Jessica's success will help the whole family, my mother told me. I believed her. I was 18. I didn't know how manipulation worked. I didn't know that people could make stealing sound like sacrifice. So I agreed. My tuition could wait, they said. I could take out student loans. I could work part-time. I could figure it out. Jessica couldn't miss her opportunity. So I took the loans. I went to college. And while I was living in a freezing dorm room, eating instant noodles because I was trying to save money, my sister was posting pictures from a luxury resort in Tulum. She was wearing expensive clothes. She was smiling beside a pool. She looked happy. I stared at those pictures on my phone and knew something about them felt wrong. But I couldn't explain what it was. Now I could. She was enjoying a future that had been purchased with mine. That was the first debt I absorbed for my family. It should have been the last. It wasn't. Financial control doesn't always look like someone stealing your wallet. Sometimes it looks like a parent asking you to help just this once. Sometimes it sounds like, we're family. Sometimes it comes disguised as guilt. And sometimes it grows so slowly that you don't realize you're trapped until the walls are already around you. For me, it was like invasive ivy. At first, it looked harmless. Then it wrapped around everything. Then it started choking the life out of the structure. By last winter, my parents' financial situation had become impossible to hide. Foreclosure notices started arriving. They hid them. Of course they did. I didn't find out until a process server came to my studio looking for my father. I remember standing behind my desk, staring at the man holding the papers. My first thought wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. I was embarrassed for my family. I was embarrassed that someone outside the family had found out. And then I was angry. Not because they had lied to me, but because I knew what they were going to ask next. They needed money. Again. So I paid. I paid the overdue amount. I paid property taxes. I covered repairs. I helped keep the house from going into foreclosure. I told myself I was saving our family home. But the truth was much uglier. I was financing their refusal to face reality. I was keeping a fantasy alive. For years, I had convinced myself that helping them was loyalty. Now, sitting alone and watching my own family laugh about me on a live stream, I finally understood the truth. It wasn't loyalty. It was fear. I was afraid that if I stopped paying, I would stop being their daughter. I was afraid that if I stopped helping, they would finally admit they didn't need me. I was afraid that without my money, they would have no reason to call. And that was the saddest part. I had confused being needed with being loved. That night, I stopped. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't call my mother. I didn't send Jessica an angry message. I simply opened my banking app. I looked at the automatic transfer scheduled for the first of the month. $3,500. For years, I had clicked confirm without thinking. This time, I cancelled it. My finger hovered over the screen for several seconds. Then I pressed the button. Cancelled. That's it. No explosion. No screaming. No dramatic music. Just one small tap. But somehow, it felt like the loudest thing I had ever done. Then I opened the folder on my computer where I kept every payment, invoice, receipt, transfer, and email connected to my family. 5 years of records. 5 years of proof. I had never expected to need them. Now I was glad I had kept everything. I created a new folder. I named it Enough. Then I began moving every document into it. The mortgage payments. The property taxes. The utility bills. The repairs. The money for Jessica's projects. The money for family events. The money I had spent keeping their image alive. I sat there until nearly 3 in the morning. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The next morning, my mother called. I watched her name appear on my phone. I didn't answer. She called again. Then again. Then Jessica. Then my father. Then my mother again. Eventually, a message appeared. Why didn't the payment go through? I stared at it. Not "Are you okay?" Not "We missed you last night." Not "I'm sorry about what was said." Just, why didn't the payment go through? I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because suddenly, everything made sense. They hadn't noticed my absence at dinner. They had noticed the missing money. That was the answer I had spent years searching for. I finally had it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to argue with it. I wasn't going to beg them to love me. I wasn't going to explain myself. I wasn't going to prove that I belonged. I had spent years paying for a seat at a table where they never intended to let me sit. So I stopped paying. And then I started building a table of my own. One where my name was on the door. One where my work was recognized. One where nobody needed me to finance their happiness. Most importantly, one where I didn't have to earn the right to belong. Because I finally understood something my family had taught me without meaning to. Being someone's bank account does not make you family. Being useful does not make you loved. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop watering a garden that has been allowed to grow over you. The next morning, I went to my studio before sunrise. The city was still quiet. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and looked at all the flowers waiting for me. For the first time, they didn't feel like work. They felt like freedom. I picked up a pair of pruning shears. There was a dead stem in one of the arrangements. I cut it cleanly. Then I smiled. It was time to make room for something new. I had invested so much into my family that walking away felt like admitting I had wasted my entire life. Not just my money, my childhood, my inheritance, my time, my trust, even my dignity. For years, I had convinced myself that all of my sacrifices had to mean something. I couldn't accept that I had given so much to people who never intended to give anything back. So I kept paying. Not because I believed I would ever receive a financial return. I kept paying because stopping would force me to face a painful truth. The entire thing had been a bad investment from the beginning. I had been trying to make my suffering feel worthwhile. If I paid another bill, maybe they would appreciate me. If I saved the house, maybe my parents would finally be proud of me. If I helped Jessica build her career, maybe she would eventually see me as her sister instead of her personal bank account. If I gave them enough, maybe one day they would finally give me a place at the table. That was the lie I had been living. I wasn't buying a home. I wasn't protecting a family legacy. I wasn't even helping people who genuinely needed me. I was throwing more money into something that had already failed, hoping that enough sacrifice would somehow change the past. I kept telling myself that if I invested just a little more, things would get better. But that night, while I watched my family laugh about me on a live stream, I finally understood. They didn't see me as a daughter. They didn't see me as a sister. They didn't see me as a partner. They saw me as a resource. Something they could use until there was nothing left. And for the first time, I wasn't going to argue with that reality. I looked at the numbers on my banking screen. The money I had already spent was gone. I couldn't recover my college years. I couldn't get my inheritance back. I couldn't undo the years of debt. I couldn't erase every bill I had paid. But I could stop losing more. That was the difference. I didn't need to fix the past. I only needed to stop sacrificing my future to it. My grief was messy. It sat inside me like water spilled across a work table, spreading in every direction. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not that night. I needed to be careful. I needed to be calm. I needed to make decisions I wouldn't regret later. So I didn't scream. I didn't call my mother and demand an explanation. I didn't send Jessica a long message. I didn't beg them to apologize. I didn't ask why they hated me. The live stream had already answered every question I had. The video was still playing on my second monitor. My mother was telling another story about me. Apparently, years ago, I had embarrassed her at a charity event because I wore the wrong shoes. Jessica was sitting beside her, trying not to laugh. I listened for a few seconds. Then I turned away. I had heard enough. I opened a new browser tab. My hands were completely steady. That surprised me. I had expected anger to make me shake. Instead, my anger was cold, quiet, focused. It felt almost strange how calm I was. I logged into my bank account. The first thing I saw was the automatic transfer scheduled for the first of the month. $3,500. The description said, estate maintenance. I had made that payment every month for years. $3,500. Every month. Again and again. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I clicked on the recurring payment. A confirmation box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer? I almost smiled. For years, I had been afraid of that question. Tonight, the answer was easy. Yes. I clicked confirm. The payment was cancelled. That was it. No alarm sounded. Nobody burst through my door. The world didn't end. But inside me, something shifted. Then I moved to the next account. The credit cards. I had added my parents and Jessica as authorized users years earlier. It was supposed to be for emergencies. At least, that was what I had been told. But their definition of an emergency seemed to include expensive dinners, spa appointments, designer clothes, and things I didn't even recognize. I opened the account. I froze every card. Then I reported the cards as compromised and requested new numbers. The cards sitting inside their wallets would soon be useless. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. Next came the subscriptions. The family streaming accounts. The cloud storage. The shared online services. The accounts Jessica used to store thousands of photos and videos. I had been paying for all of them. I changed the passwords one at a time. Log out of all devices. Confirm. Change password. Confirm. Remove access. Confirm. Each time I clicked the button, I felt another piece of the old family arrangement disappear. I imagined the huge house across town. The television screens going dark. The music stopping. Jessica trying to log into an account and getting an error message. My parents discovering that their cards no longer worked. I wasn't destroying their lives. I wasn't taking anything that belonged to them. I was simply stopping myself from paying for things that were never my responsibility. For years, I had built the financial support system beneath their lifestyle. That night, I finally removed myself from it. It took me about 45 minutes. 45 minutes to dismantle a system I had spent 5 years building. 5 years of automatic payments. 5 years of helping. 5 years of covering emergencies. 5 years of telling myself that family meant never saying no. When I finished, I closed my laptop. The room became completely quiet. But this silence felt different. Before, silence meant loneliness. That night, silence felt like protection. It felt like a locked door. A safe place. A boundary. I looked at the clock. 11:12 a.m. My mother was still talking on the live stream. She had no idea what I had just done. She was still laughing. Still telling stories. Still acting like the world belonged to her. I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still steady. I took one slow sip. Then I turned off the live stream. The screen went black. The show was over. I went to bed. At least, I tried. I barely slept. But at 9 o'clock the next morning, the chaos began. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I opened the message. There was no apology. No mention of the live stream. No, I'm sorry. No, we shouldn't have talked about you like that. Nothing. Instead, she wrote, Ashley, the card was declined at the caterer. Fix it immediately. I stared at the message. Then another one came through. Jessica has a shoot at noon and needs the props. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was reading. After everything they had said about me the night before, my mother still assumed I would wake up, see a problem, and immediately fix it. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I had stopped the payment. She didn't even ask whether I had seen the live stream. She simply assumed the money would come back. In her mind, I wasn't a daughter who had been hurt. I was an account that had temporarily stopped working. I didn't answer. By noon, the messages had changed. My mother went from demanding to angry. Then came another text. You're overreacting. A minute later. You know how stress makes us talk. Then. We were just blowing off steam. And finally. Turn the money back on. This is childish. Childish. I stared at that word for a long time. I had spent years paying their bills. I had taken on debt for them. I had rescued their house. I had paid for Jessica's business expenses. I had worked until my hands were covered in cuts so they could maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And now I was the childish one. I put my phone down. Then I picked it up again. I opened Instagram. Jessica had posted a story. It was a black screen with white writing. Some family members are so toxic they'll try to dim your light because they're jealous. Then another line appeared. Jealousy is a disease. Get well soon. I stared at the screen. For a second, I almost laughed. Jealousy. They actually believed I wanted their life. They believed I was jealous of Jessica. They believed I wanted the followers, the parties, the designer clothes, the endless photographs, and the carefully edited version of happiness she showed online. They had completely misunderstood me. I didn't want her life. I didn't want their mansion. I didn't want their social status. I didn't want their parties. I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted something much simpler. Peace. I wanted to wake up without wondering which bill my family needed me to pay. I wanted to build my business without feeling guilty for being successful. I wanted to spend my own money without worrying that someone would call me selfish. I wanted to be able to say no without being punished for it. Most of all, I wanted to be treated like a person instead of a bank account. But they couldn't understand that. They were convinced I would eventually give in. They thought the pressure would break me. They had done it before. Whenever I tried to create a boundary, they pushed. Whenever I said no, they called me selfish. Whenever I questioned their spending, they called me difficult. Whenever I asked for respect, They accused me of being dramatic. And usually, I gave in. I would apologize. I would send the money. I would fix the problem. I would convince myself that keeping peace was more important than being right. But this time was different. I had seen the truth with my own eyes. I had heard them laugh about me. I had heard my mother call me an embarrassment. I had heard my sister describe me as nothing more than someone useful for writing checks. There was no misunderstanding anymore. There was nothing left to explain. They had shown me exactly how they felt. And I finally believed them. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica. You seriously need to grow up. You're hurting the whole family. I looked at it. Then I typed a response. I didn't send it. I deleted it. I realized I didn't owe them an explanation. For the first time, silence wasn't weakness. Silence was my answer. I placed my phone face down on the table. Then I walked into my studio. Morning light was coming through the windows. Rows of flowers stood in buckets. White roses. Peonies. Hydrangeas. Eucalyptus. Everything was waiting to be turned into something beautiful. I picked up my shears. For years, I had used those shears to cut away damaged stems so healthy flowers could survive. That morning, I finally understood the lesson. Sometimes you don't save a plant by holding on to every dead branch. Sometimes you save it by cutting away what is killing it. And my family had been killing parts of me for years. I had just been too afraid to cut them away. Not anymore. They could call me selfish. They could call me jealous. They could call me dramatic. They could tell everyone I had abandoned them. I couldn't control their story. But I could finally control mine. And for the first time, I wasn't going to spend another dollar trying to convince people to love me. I was done paying for a place in a family that had never valued me. I was done confusing sacrifice with love. I was done treating my own future like it was less important than their comfort. The money had stopped. The cards were frozen. The passwords were changed. The payments were cancelled. And, for the first time in my adult life, the decision was mine. I had finally stopped trying to buy a seat at their table. Now I was going to build my own. They thought I was throwing a tantrum. They thought I would calm down in a day or two, feel guilty, and come crawling back. They had seen me do it before. Whenever I became upset, they waited. Whenever I tried to stand up for myself, they pushed harder. And eventually, I usually gave in. But this time was different. They didn't understand that I wasn't having a tantrum. I was ending an arrangement. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was evicting myself from a family that had been taking everything from me while making me feel guilty for asking for respect. By that evening, the phone calls started. My father was usually the quiet one when family arguments happened. He normally let my mother do the talking while he sat back and acted like he was above the drama. That evening, however, he called. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, I received a voicemail. I pressed play. His voice was calm, but I could hear the anger underneath it. Ashley, this has gone far enough. You're embarrassing this family. If you don't unlock those accounts by tomorrow, we're going to have a serious problem. I listened to it twice. Then I saved the recording. I knew I might need it later. For years, my family had taught me to question my own memory. If I remembered something differently, they told me I was confused. If I was hurt, they said I was too sensitive. If I complained about money, they said I didn't understand family responsibility. This time, I wasn't going to rely on memory. I was keeping records. Every message. Every voicemail. Every payment. Every document. Everything. They still believed they had control over me. They still thought I was the same girl who would apologize simply because she had finally found the courage to say no. But that girl was gone. She had disappeared the moment I heard my own mother laughing about me. Something inside me had finally broken. And strangely, breaking wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. It was the thing that finally made me strong. For years, I had been repairing my family's image. Whenever something went wrong, I fixed it. When the bills were overdue, I paid them. When the house needed repairs, I found the money. When Jessica needed something for her business, I helped. When my parents were embarrassed, I covered for them. I was always carrying a paintbrush, trying to cover the cracks in a wall that was already falling apart. But that night, I put the brush down. I wasn't going to repaint the cracks anymore. I was going to see how bad the damage really was. There was something I needed to know. How much of their lifestyle had I actually been paying for? And how much of their success was real? I called Aunt Karen. She answered on the first ring. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I need your help." Karen was the person who had accidentally live-streamed the family dinner. She was also much more than that. She was a forensic accountant. For years, she had quietly told me that something about my parents' finances didn't add up. I had always defended them. I told her they were simply bad with money. I told her they had made a few mistakes. I told her family problems were complicated. Maybe I didn't want to know the truth. Maybe some part of me was afraid that if I looked too closely, I would discover something I couldn't forgive. That night, I finally asked her to look. She arrived at my studio about 30 minutes later. She walked through the door carrying a black briefcase. Her face was serious. She didn't even take off her coat. "I saw the live stream," she said. I nodded. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. "Don't be sorry." She put her briefcase on my workbench. "I should have stopped it." "No," I said. "I needed to hear it." Karen looked at me for a moment. Then she opened her briefcase. "Then let's find out exactly what you've been paying for." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Bank statements, credit card records, automatic payments, invoices, transfers, subscriptions, business expenses. At first, nothing surprised me. There were the usual things. Utility bills, property repairs, insurance, groceries. Then Karen stopped. She leaned closer to the screen. "Ashley." Her voice had changed. "What?" "Look at this payment." I moved closer. It was a monthly charge of $3,700. The company name was Digital Horizon Solutions. I frowned. "I think that's Dad's website company." Karen shook her head. "No." She typed the company name into a search window. I watched her screen. She clicked through several pages. Then she turned the laptop toward me. "They aren't a website company." "What are they?" "Reputation management." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "They manage online reputation. Sometimes that's legitimate. But this company specializes in artificial engagement." I didn't understand. Karen opened an invoice. Then another. The services were listed clearly. Follower packages, engagement packages, comment generation, automated accounts, audience growth. I felt my stomach tighten. "Wait," I whispered. Karen nodded. "Your parents have been paying them to increase Jessica's online numbers." I stared at the screen. "No." She looked at me. "I'm afraid so." "How much?" Karen kept scrolling. Then she calculated the yearly total. Almost $45,000 a year. I couldn't speak. $45,000. Every year. They had been spending almost $45,000 to make Jessica look more successful than she really was. I suddenly remembered all those photographs. The thousands of likes. The endless comments. The huge follower count. The brands. The compliments. The people telling Jessica she was an inspiration. I had spent years standing behind her while she acted like she had built everything herself. And now I was learning that much of the attention had been purchased. Her success wasn't what I thought it was. It was manufactured. It was carefully built to look real. I looked at Karen. So all those followers. Many of them appear to be fake or artificially generated. And the engagement. Artificial too. I leaned back in my chair. I felt sick. For years, I had compared myself to my sister. I thought she was more successful, more beautiful, more confident, more loved. I thought she had something I didn't. I thought I was the boring sister who worked behind the scenes while Jessica lived the life everyone wanted. But now I understood. I had been comparing my real life to a performance. And worse than that, I had helped pay for the performance. My college money had helped fund it. My monthly payments had helped keep it going. My work had helped create the beautiful photographs. My money had helped pay for the house where she filmed her content. I wasn't jealous of her success. I was unknowingly financing the illusion of it. I looked at Karen. Is this illegal? She took a breath. Some of what they're doing could create serious legal problems, especially if they're using false numbers to mislead brands. I stared at the invoice again. Everything suddenly made sense. The family had spent years making me feel like the failure. They told me Jessica was the talented one. They told me I was too serious, too quiet, too difficult, too ordinary. Meanwhile, they were using my money to build a fake version of her success. It wasn't just financial betrayal. It was psychological. They had built an entire world where I was supposed to feel inferior. And they had used my own money to build it. I looked at Karen. Print everything. She nodded. Everything. Every invoice. Every payment. Every account. Every document. I wanted a complete record. No more guessing. No more excuses. No more you misunderstood. No more that isn't what happened. I wanted facts. Karen started printing. Page after page came out of the printer. The sound filled my studio. For years, I had kept receipts because I was organized. That night, those receipts became evidence of a life I had finally decided to leave behind. We finished just before 3 in the afternoon. That's when my family arrived. I heard the front door open. My assistant looked frightened. Then my father walked into the studio. My mother followed him. Jessica came behind them. The 3 of them entered like they owned the place. My father slammed a folder onto the front desk. We need to talk. I stood slowly. My hands were dirty from working with flowers. I wiped them on a towel. No. He stared at me. What? You need to leave. My mother looked shocked. Jessica rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. I pointed toward the door. This is my business. You don't get to come in here and demand money. My father stepped closer. Enough with this attitude. I didn't move. You have until I call security. Jessica laughed. Security? Seriously? Then she looked around my studio. You play with flowers all day, Ashley. We're dealing with real problems. I looked at her. What problems? My father answered. The sunroom renovation. I almost smiled. The sunroom? Contractors are threatening to walk away, my mother said. We need $45,000 immediately. There it was. Another emergency. Another bill. Another crisis they expected me to solve. My father leaned toward me. You're going to write the check today. I looked at all 3 of them. And suddenly, they didn't look like my family anymore. They looked like 3 desperate people standing in front of the person who had been funding them. The sunroom wasn't the real problem. The problem was that their entire system was collapsing. They had spent years living beyond their means. They had built Jessica's online image with fake attention. They had used my money to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. And now the money had stopped. They were panicking. My father held out his hand. I didn't give him a check. Instead, I reached underneath my desk. I pulled out a thick binder. It was heavy. I had spent days organizing it. I walked around the desk and handed it to him. He looked at the binder. What is this? The truth. He opened it. Inside were 5 years of records. Every payment I had made. Every transfer. Every bill. Every repair. Every emergency. Every time they had asked me for money. My father flipped through the pages. His face changed. My mother stepped closer. What are you doing? I looked at her. Keeping track. She looked offended. Why are you keeping score? We're family. I took a breath. Because you kept score first. Nobody spoke. I continued. You kept an invisible record of everything I did wrong. You remembered every time I disagreed with you. Every time I didn't behave the way you wanted. Every time I wasn't like Jessica. I pointed toward the binder. But you never counted what I did right. My father closed the binder. How much? I looked at him. $722,000. My mother's mouth fell open. That's impossible. It's not. I opened the binder again. It's all here. $214,000. That was what I had given them over 5 years. And somehow, I was still the selfish daughter. I was still the embarrassment. I was still the one who needed to do more. My mother shook her head. We never asked you to keep track of it. I almost laughed. You didn't have to. She stared at me. I knew exactly what was happening. I looked at Jessica. You all did. Jessica crossed her arms. So what? You're going to hold money over our heads now? No. I shook my head. I'm not holding anything over your heads. I closed the binder. I'm putting it down. My father stepped forward. Ashley, this is your family. I know. Then act like it. I looked at him for a long moment. I have been acting like family for years. My voice remained calm. I paid bills. I paid taxes. I helped with repairs. I funded Jessica's career. I protected the house. I covered emergencies. I kept your secrets. I looked at my mother. And what did I get? She didn't answer. I looked at Jessica. What did I get from you? She looked away. I nodded. Exactly. Then I said the words I had been too afraid to say for years. You treated my contributions like rent. They all became quiet. You made me feel like I owed you simply for existing. Like I had to pay for my place in this family. I took a breath. Well, the rent is due. My father stared at me. I shook my head. No. I corrected myself. The lease is over. I walked toward the door. You don't get another payment from me. My mother began crying. Jessica started shouting. My father threatened to call a lawyer. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I simply opened the door. For years, they had convinced me that leaving them meant I was abandoning my family. But that afternoon, I finally understood. I wasn't abandoning my family. I was abandoning the role they had forced me to play. The role of the daughter who paid. The sister who stayed quiet. The person who fixed every problem. The person who was expected to sacrifice everything while receiving nothing. I was done. The door was open. And this time, I was the one asking them to leave. Because the truth was simple. They had spent years making me pay for a place in their lives. I had finally decided that I didn't want that place anymore. I wanted my own life. And I wasn't going to finance theirs to get it. I pulled the second document from the folder and placed it on the table in front of them. It was the report Karen had given me. And this, I said, tapping the last page, is about the sunroom. My father frowned. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the overdue invoice from Digital Horizon Solutions. The moment I said those words, the entire room went silent. Not the normal kind of silence. It was the kind of silence where everyone suddenly knows the truth is standing in the middle of the room, and nobody wants to be the first person to look at it. I looked at my sister, Jessica. The color drained from her face. My father looked as if someone had just punched him in the stomach. I took a slow breath. I know about the bots, I said. Jessica didn't move. I know about the fake followers. I know about the fake comments and the fake likes. And most importantly, I know where my money went. My father's eyes dropped to the papers. I continued. My money wasn't being used to repair the house. It wasn't going toward the sunroom. It wasn't being used for anything you told me it was being used for. I looked directly at Jessica. It was being used to buy you an audience because you couldn't build one yourself. Her eyes filled with tears. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered every time I had worked late to earn the money she was spending. I remembered every bill I had paid while she complained that she needed more money for her career. I remembered my parents telling me that helping family was my responsibility. I remembered how many times I had been made to feel guilty for saying no. Jessica finally broke down. "You're ruining everything," she screamed. I shook my head. "No, Jessica. I'm not ruining anything." I gathered the papers and placed them back into the folder. "I'm just closing the account." She stared at me. My father opened his mouth, but I stopped him before he could say anything. "You both had plenty of chances to tell me the truth." Nobody answered. I walked toward the door and opened it. Then I turned around. "Get out." Jessica looked at me as though she couldn't believe I had actually said it. "If either of you comes back here," I continued, "I will call the police." My voice was calm. That surprised even me. For years, I had imagined having this confrontation. In those fantasies, I always screamed. I always cried. I always demanded an apology. But standing there, I felt strangely peaceful. I looked at my father one last time. "And Dad," I said, "good luck with the sunroom." His face tightened. Neither of them moved. They stood there waiting. I knew exactly what they were expecting. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for me to feel guilty. They were waiting for me to apologize for being too harsh. Most of all, they were waiting for me to do what I had always done. Fix everything. But this time, I didn't. I didn't blink. I didn't apologize. I didn't take back a single word. Finally, they turned around and walked out. I watched them disappear through the doorway. Then I closed the door behind them. The click of the lock sounded louder than I expected. I turned the sign on the front door from open to closed. For a few seconds, I simply stood there. My hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid. Because I realized something. For the first time in my entire life, I had chosen myself. The consequences didn't take long to appear. Jessica's online numbers collapsed almost immediately. Without my monthly payments to Digital Horizon Solutions, the fake accounts disappeared. The thousands of followers she had proudly shown everyone began vanishing. Her comment sections became almost completely empty. The likes stopped coming. The engagement numbers she had bragged about were suddenly gone. What remained was the truth. Jessica didn't have the huge audience everyone thought she had. She had a small number of real followers who were confused about what had happened. Within a few weeks, the brands that had been interested in working with her stopped calling. The sponsorship offers disappeared. The free products stopped arriving. The invitations stopped. It turned out that being an influencer was easy when someone else was secretly paying for the illusion. Once the money stopped, the illusion disappeared too. Jessica blamed me. Of course she did. She told relatives that I had destroyed her career. She said I was jealous of her. She said I couldn't stand seeing her succeed. I heard all of it. But I didn't respond. Because I knew the truth. I hadn't destroyed her career. I had simply stopped paying for it. My parents didn't fight me the way I expected. They didn't scream. They didn't threaten me. Instead, they seemed to collapse under the weight of everything that had happened. The money was gone. Jessica's perfect image was gone. And the lifestyle they had built around both things was no longer possible. They had to move. The beautiful house they had worked so hard to maintain was suddenly too expensive. They downsized to a smaller condo a couple of towns away. Whenever anyone asked why they had moved, they blamed the economy. They blamed rising prices. They blamed bad luck. They blamed anything except the choices they had made. A few months later, I started receiving letters. The first one was from my mother. She wrote about forgiveness. She wrote about family. She wrote about how life was too short to hold grudges. The second letter was similar. Then another came. Each one seemed to carry the same hidden message. Forget what happened. Come back. Start giving again. But I had finally learned the difference between forgiveness and returning to the same situation that had hurt me. I could forgive someone without giving them access to my life. So I never answered. My mailbox stayed closed. And so did my wallet. At first, that felt strange. I had spent so many years believing that saying no made me selfish. Now I was beginning to understand that sometimes saying no is the only way to protect yourself. I went back to work. My studio slowly became the place I had always dreamed it could be. I filled it with fresh flowers. Peonies. Ranunculus. Roses. Greenery. The smell of flowers filled the room every morning. Sunlight poured through the windows and touched the glass vases, spreading little pieces of color across the floor. One afternoon, I stood in the center of the studio and looked around. I realized something that nearly brought me to tears. Everything I saw belonged to me. The flowers were mine. The business was mine. The money I earned was mine. The decisions were mine. The future was mine. And for the first time, I wasn't building something beautiful so someone else could take credit for it. I wasn't working myself exhausted so my family could live a life they couldn't afford. I wasn't sacrificing my dreams to protect someone else's image. I was finally living my own life. Looking back, I understand that cutting people out of your life isn't always about hate. Sometimes it is about survival. Sometimes you have to remove the things that are slowly draining you before you have any room left to grow. A garden cannot bloom if you refuse to remove the dead branches. And neither can a person. I spent years watering everyone else's garden while mine was slowly dying. Then one day, I finally decided to stop. I cut away the guilt. I cut away the manipulation. I cut away the lies. I cut away the people who only loved me when I was useful to them. And once I did, something beautiful happened. I started to bloom. For the first time, my life wasn't a backdrop for someone else's success. It was my life. My work. My money. My choices. My future. And I wouldn't trade that freedom for anything. If you've ever had to let go of people who were holding you back just so you could finally breathe, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Sometimes walking away isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the moment your real story finally begins.